A new study says type 2 diabetics, go ahead and eat the potatoes. It's not going to mess with your blood sugar. Find out the details here today on Jimmy Rants. Click on that little box down there in the corner. It'll take you straight to IGTV for today's episode. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, you can engage live in the content. You got to go follow me. I'm starting up over on Instagram. I am at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live. So many people coming in right now. Thank you guys for being here today. We do go live at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday, so be there, be square. We also simulcast over here on my Facebook page where Emily, by the way, won one of my books in my contest just last night. So congratulations, Emily. And I see Jessica just came in. So thank you guys for being here today. Also, thank you to my YouTubers. Thank you for coming on in. And get ready, YouTube. Today is your day. Somebody on YouTube is going to win a copy of one of my books as part of my contest. If you missed the live here on Instagram, you can watch the replay over on IGTV. We also put the replay up over on YouTube. And today, you guys, type in a keyword Jimmy Rants, you will find the show there. But today I have a very special Jimmy Rants bonus episode. On Wednesdays, I always air the episode of the Living La Vida Low Carb show. So I had an interview on there today with Tara Garrison. So she's a mindset coach, and we went in all kinds of directions. And you really want to watch that video. It is over as a Jimmy Rants bonus episode over there on YouTube right now. So as soon as you're done watching Jimmy Rants, you got more content you can go check out. Or if you're the podcast listening type, it will be on the Living La Vida Low Carb show today. Usually it's up by noon. So when Jimmy Rants is over, it's usually up on the podcast, llvlc.com, or wherever you listen to podcasts. And then finally, pop on over to the official website for this show. It is jimmyrants.com. While you're there, you can see all the past episodes. And it's also where you can show your support either through the Patreon link or a PayPal link. And a donation of any amount would be greatly appreciated. Okay, you guys, we are continuing the farewell freebies contest this week. So if you've been missing any of my Jimmy Rants or not paying attention to my social media pages, shame on you. I'm just kidding. People do have lives, Jimmy. But I'm doing a contest this week where I'm giving away free copies of literally any of my books that you want. So I'm showing them all to you on the screen now. And if you are chosen as a winner, then you will get your choice of any of these books that you want. And yeah, so I've already given away, in the first 2 days, I gave away about a dozen, just over a dozen books. And so you have an opportunity. Literally all you have to do is engage in my work. So if you leave a comment on any post that I do, if you leave a comment here when we're doing Jimmy Rants, that is your eligibility into winning one of the books. And if you're watching this on replay, you get to play as well. So I am going in and I'm seeing it. I'm not going to give a book to somebody where it's just one comment. It's got to be at least like 4 or 5 comments. And if there's 4 or 5, then I'm choosing someone to win. So this is your chance, guys. And so now through Friday, I still have several more dozen I'm going to give away. And I will tell you now, you will want to be here on the Friday Jimmy Rants. Just warning you now, go ahead and prepare 11 a.m. Eastern Time Friday on the Ask Me Anything episode. You will definitely want to be here because I'm going to go cray-cray giving away books on Friday. So if you haven't won yet, don't despair. Come back Friday. Odds are you're probably going to win a book. So I hope that encourages you if you're feeling discouraged that you didn't win. But that's the contest, guys. Come on in. I am leaving, by the way. Saturday is my last day. I'm going away for 2 months at least. And yeah, so this is my way of kind of saying thank you to you guys for all your support of my work. Okay, you guys, I wanted to bring to you a story that one of my followers here on Instagram brought to my attention today. And we see these kind of stories kind of often in the mainstream of research, because it is a study I'm going to talk about here. And it's almost as if it's an apology for being who they are, because low carb diets have been pretty popular over the past 15 or so years, 15, 20 years. with Atkins, and then the paleo and primal movement, and then keto, and then carnivore. Potatoes pretty much are on the outskirts of most of those. I know the paleo people did allow some if you were insulin sensitive, but for the most part, low carb diets do not include potatoes, and most certainly not for people with type 2 diabetes. But there is a brand new study, and I've got the whole study. I printed it out. It was actually 53 pages, but I noticed that the last half of that was just the references. And so I will go through that study here in a minute, but I did have a news story about it, and it had some key quotes in there about the study that I think you'll find interesting, so that when we go over the study, you kind of know the researchers and what they're thinking here. But the headline, you guys, type 2 diabetes patients can eat potatoes without blood sugar control issues, study shows. So at first blush, when I saw that headline, I'm going, type 2 diabetic patients can eat potatoes and not have any issues with their blood sugar. Did somebody forget to tell these people that starch, once it enters the bloodstream, actually turns to glucose, which is, that's right, it's sugar. And what is the antithesis of a diabetic's body? It's sugar. You got blood sugar issues. And so right off the bat, I'm already kind of side-eyeing this study. We're going to get into the details, and we'll see the nitty-gritty of what they found. But let's read this story. This is out of Melbourne, Australia. While sugar and potatoes may not sound like they have much in common, patients with type 2 diabetes are often told to avoid them. Researchers in Australia say the long-held belief is eating these vegetables. It's not a vegetable. Can we get that straight? A potato is not a vegetable. It is a tuber. There's a difference between vegetables and tubers, okay? Like, I love how they always try to sneak that into an article. Well, this top popular vegetable. No, it's not a vegetable. It's a tuber. Make it hard to control your blood glucose levels. They have a study now that finds that this may not be the case at all. A clinical trial reveals eating potatoes along with having other foods will not negatively impact a diabetes patient's levels. Okay. We're going to get into the details of the study here in a minute, but let's just stop there. If somebody's just casually reading this article, you're type 2 diabetic, for example, and you see the headline, type 2 diabetes patients, you can eat potatoes and have no blood sugar control issues whatsoever. That's where most people stop. And that's why these kinds of headlines are dangerous. Because what if a type 2 diabetic reads that headline and they go, oh, I can start eating potatoes again. They don't test their blood sugar. Most type 2s don't. Unless it's like way out of control and the doctor kind of demands that they do. Or if they do, they're very sporadic in testing. And so this is dangerous kind of from a headline perspective. But then to say, well, eating potatoes along with other food, that's down in the story a little bit. And other foods such as fat and protein can blunt the effect on the blood sugar of the carbohydrates that's in potatoes. But they don't put that in the headline. So there's people that think they can go and have a potato and they're type 2 diabetic and it's not going to impact their blood sugar. Can I tell you now, I don't care who you are, if you are a type 2 diabetic, you have a severe case of insulin resistance, your blood sugar is going to be effed. It is. Who are they fooling? It's also not the full context of what they studied, which when we get into the actual study here in a minute, you'll see what I'm talking about. The team is out of Australian Catholic University. They reported potatoes are among the foods which have a high glycemic index. So you've heard GI over the years. Eating these foods at night can be particularly risky when blood sugar levels tend to spike. So what they did, the researchers examined 24 adults, all with type 2 diabetes, who either had a dinner with one of 3 different versions of skinless white potatoes or basmati rice. So the basmati rice, they use that because it's a low GI carbohydrate food. So they did continuous monitoring of the blood glucose levels. The results revealed the GI is an inaccurate measurement of glycemic response. Let me stop there. Glycemic index is an incomplete thing. Here in the keto and low carb community, I don't think we care about glycemic index. There is another thing that's much more important. It's this thing called glycemic load. If glycemic load is new to you, go look it up and look up what glycemic load is. What glycemic load does, and it's a lot more accurate, is it says, okay, you've got this glycemic index food, but the amount of that glycemic index food matters. And so the glycemic load not only looks at the glycemic index, but also the amount of that thing that you're eating with the low GI to come up with a low glycemic load, and that makes the difference. They didn't look at glycemic load in this study. They only looked at glycemic index. The study authors add participants eating potatoes with their meal actually had a better nocturnal, meaning while they're sleeping, glucose response than those who ate rice. So again, they're saying they ate the potatoes, they had better blood sugar control during the night. There are limitations using the GI of singular foods and their acute effect on blood glucose when trying to determine their influence on long-term health indices, particularly in people with type 2 diabetes, as individual foods are rarely consumed in isolation, and that's true, but are more likely to be eaten with other foods as part of the mixed meals, according to primary investigator Dr. Brooke Devlin. She goes on to say it's rare that people eat foods in isolation, and the findings from this study demonstrate how other factors, such as what time of day the food is consumed, what it was paired with, all of these things need to be considered when investigating the glucose release of mixed meals in individuals with type 2 diabetes. So what they're saying is we need to kind of see, okay, yes, have a potato, but what are you eating with the potato? Well, that's with anything. Let's not sit here and pretend like that there aren't people who wouldn't go and make a baked potato and put fat-free margarine on there and put fat-free cheese on there and fat-free sour cream and do all the healthy things to that potato, and that they would not eat that in isolation. They would. They would. And so the assumption here, well, we know people will have a mixed diet. Not always. Not always. Type 2 diabetes patients ate the same breakfast and lunch during the experiment, but then they had 4 different dinner options. The test meals featured either skinless white potatoes, which were either boiled, roasted, or boiled and cooled and then reheated. The control meal, they got rice. The group cycled through all of these meals with a 9-day break in between, so at least they had a good washout period. We've done several studies lately that I've featured here on Jimmy Rants where they did what's called a crossover study, and when they crossed over, they immediately crossed over. They didn't have any washout. They did a 9-day washout between the study groups, so at least they got that right. Researchers took blood samples right after each meal, and again, every 30 minutes for 2 hours. So they did half-hour postprandial blood sugar readings for 2 hours. The study also monitored each diabetic patient as they slept, looking at their glucose levels throughout the night. So they must have had a CGM on, which we'll find out in a minute that they did. The results find a person's glucose response does not change whether they're eating rice or a high GI food like potatoes. The Australian team adds overnight glucose readings stayed much more stable after eating potatoes with dinner as compared to the low GI, the rice alternative. These findings are contrary to that of observational research and traditional dietary guidance that has led some to believe that potatoes are not an appropriate food choice for people with type 2 diabetes. Our study shows that high GI foods like potatoes can be consumed as part of a healthy evening meal without negatively affecting your glucose response, and while delivering key nutrients in relatively few calories, which is essential for people with type 2 diabetes. Just that last statement alone, I could sit here and rant for an hour about, but I'll keep it short. Without negatively affecting glucose response. We're going to get into the study here in a minute, but see, I think they're hiding what they did because they're just saying, oh yeah, just have potatoes with your evening meal. It's no big deal. But they did something to the potatoes that made them less glycemically impact. I've already talked about fat and protein can blunt the effects of it, but they did something else, which again, when we get into the study, you're going to see what else they did. But delivering key nutrients with relatively few calories, there's lots of nutrients in a lot of different kinds of foods. There's no special nutrients only found in potatoes, and yet they're making it seem like in this story and in the quote from the lead researcher that there's some key nutrients only found in potatoes. Devlin and her team note the study only focused on the glucose response of one meal. The meal size was also larger than what it would typically recommend for type 2 diabetics, but was still in line with the normal eating pattern. Researchers will also need to determine the long-term impact of adding potatoes to a diabetic diet. Potatoes are a vegetable. No, they're not. The researcher just said that. The potatoes are a vegetable. They're sustainable, affordable, nutrient-dense, and thus they can play an important role in modern diets irrespective of your metabolic health status. Oh, guys, if you are type 2 diabetic and you're hearing about this study today, hear me loud and hear me clear. Potatoes are still off the menu. And if you don't believe me, eat a potato. Test your blood sugar at 30, 60, 90, and 120. And if your baseline, as a type 2 diabetic, if your baseline, let's just say it's 105, and at 30 minutes postprandial, it's 135, and at 1 hour postprandial, it's 195. 1.5 hours postprandial, it's 210, and at 2 hours postprandial, it's 175. Guess what? That impacted your blood sugar. It did. And the fact that they do this study knowing that this is how most people are going to respond, and it's 24 people, so it's not really applicable to a large segment of the population. I'm going to get into the actual study, but let me flip all the way to the back so that we can see exactly who it is that funded the study. This should not be a surprise. Again, in and of itself, the funder of the study doesn't invalidate it, but it certainly raises eyebrows. I recently talked about a study that showed the plant-based burgers were much better for you for various parameters than a beef burger, and you find out the Beyond Meat company, which makes the plant-based burgers, paid for it. Looky who paid for this study. This research was supported by funding to BLD and JAH. Those are the two institutions that did the study, from the Alliance for Potato Research and Education. Dun, dun, dun. The funding source was not involved in the research conduct, the article preparation, the study design, the data collection, the analysis, the interpretation, or in the decision to submit it for publication. Give me a break. They're giving you the money. What do they expect you to do with that money? Make their product look good, right? That's the goal. That's what they want. They have a desired outcome. They're giving you a boatload of money that says, okay, give me the outcome I want. And if you don't give me the outcome I want, you're not getting further funding. And we've talked about this before on previous Jimmy Rants. These institutions, these researchers are so hard up for money, they're willing to sell their soul and publish stuff that's crap, and to tell a type 2 diabetic that they can have potatoes and it's not going to have an impact on their blood sugar is criminal, if you ask me. Criminal. Now we're going to get into exactly what they did here in a minute, and you're going to see the little games they played to finagle their results. But this study appears in the journal Clinical Nutrition. Let's see if it gives me the date. It's been I think it was just a couple of days ago this came out. But it was in the journal Clinical Nutrition. And the title of the study, if you want to go look this up, it is an open access journal, which means it's available to the public, the whole study. Like I said, 53 total pages of study if you include all the notes at the end notes. But 27 pages. I'm going to try to go through this as quickly as possible. I don't want to bore you with the details, but lower nocturnal blood glucose response to a potato-based mixed evening meal compared to rice in individuals with type 2 diabetes. So let's see what their background and aim was. Guidelines for reducing postprandial, that's the after eating, blood glucose level concentrations include avoiding high glycemic index foods such as white potatoes. However, GI testing is often undertaken in the morning with foods consumed in isolation by non-clinical cohorts. So they're trying to put GI under the microscope that is not very reliable. We investigated the impact of potato preparation and consumption as part of a mixed evening meal on postprandial and nocturnal glycemic responses, as well as postprandial insulin responses in those with type 2 diabetes. So it was a randomized crossover style design study with 24 males and females. Looks like the average age 58 years old. The average BMI is 31.7, so they were overweight. And type 2 diabetes, which they controlled with diet or metformin. They completed 4 experimental trials after consuming a standard breakfast. So listen to this standard breakfast that they had them all eat. 25% of their energy intake, let's see. It says 25% energy intake. Oh, they're 25% for the whole day. So their total calories, the breakfast meal was 25%. So 1/4 of their calories for the day. Lunch was 35% of their calories for the day. And then the dinner meal was 40% of their calories. And they had a total, they ate the dinner meal, at 6 o'clock. So there are 4 choices for the things that they consumed in a mixed meal at dinner time. 1 was a boiled potato. 2nd was a roasted potato. 3rd was a boiled potato that had been cooled for 24 hours. And that's called resistant starch, which we're going to get in here in a minute. And then the 4th one was basmati rice, which was used as a control. Each meal contained, listen to this, every meal contained 50% carbohydrate, 30% fat, 20% protein. Can I make a comment about that? 50% carbs for someone with type 2 diabetes? Potato is the least of their issue if they're eating half of their calories in the form of carbohydrate. 30% fat, okay, maybe a little bit higher would be nice, but that's not bad. But 20% protein, that's woefully low in protein. Blood samples were collected prior to, immediately post-meal, and at 30-minute intervals for 120 total minutes. They used a CGM, continuous glucose monitor, to assess the nocturnal interstitial glucose concentration. That just means that while they're sleeping, it's getting the interstitial fluid, which is how they test your blood sugar, using a CGM. All right, so what were the results? There were no differences detected in postprandial glucose between the control group and all 3 of the potato conditions. Postprandial insulin was greater following the cooled compared to the control. Did you get that? Postprandial insulin levels was greater following the resistant starch that they had compared to the control. The control had the low glycemic rice. Remember that? But the one that they're trying to say is this great thing for your blood sugar. Look what it did. Postprandial insulin went up. Not good. And yet they want to pretend like, oh my God, they have great blood sugar control. It ain't just about your glucose. It's about that insulin as well. No significant differences were between the control and the boiled and roasted for postprandial insulin concentration. So only the resistant starch one, which is the main thing they're looking at here, only that one showed increase in insulin significant from the others. All the potato meals resulted in lower glucose levels than the control. Well, yeah, their insulin levels went up. With a 50% carbohydrate, 30% fat, and 20% protein diet, I want to say their blood sugar was only somewhat of a static place, simply because their insulin was working overtime. We're going to get into that nitty-gritty here in a second, but that's notable already just looking at the abstract. So their conclusion is, compared to an isoenergetic, in other words, same calories, rice meal, boiled, roasted, or boiled, then cooled potato-based meals were not associated with an unfavorable postprandial glucose response or nocturnal glycemic control, and can be considered suitable for individuals with type 2 diabetes when consumed as part of a mixed evening meal. We're going to see it here in a minute. I hope they give us the numbers on the blood sugar. There ain't no way with a 50% carbohydrate diet that they don't have elevations in blood sugar. Maybe they fit within the model of mainstream medicine's normal range for a type 2 diabetic. But if you eat a low-carb ketogenic diet, we have a different kind of normal for a type 2 diabetic. And A1C levels can't possibly go down. All right, so let's get into the introduction. Potatoes are the leading vegetable crop in the United States. No, they're not. They're the leading tuber crop in the United States. Economically, the fourth most important food crop in the world, providing several key nutrients, including potassium, dietary fiber, and vitamin C, as well as a low sodium content. Okay, potassium. You ever heard of avocados? Great potassium in avocados. Dietary fiber. Literally any vegetable gives you dietary fiber. You don't just get fiber from potatoes. Vitamin C, really? Really? Have you heard of red meat? It's in there. Vitamin C's in a lot of things. And low sodium, they act like that's a good thing. We want higher sodium because sodium salt is good for you. However, potato consumption is declining worldwide. Oh, poor babies. The low-carb diet movement has messed up your business model. Are you going to pout about it? They have been pouting about it, by the way. Because when I first came on the scene in 2005, blogging, and then podcasting in 2006, the boo birds of, oh my God, we hate the low-carb diet movement were out in full force. All the donut companies were screaming, oh my God, everybody wants low-carb this, low-carb that. The potato people, literally, if you were a high-carb food in the height of the Atkins diet era, they hated you. And nobody wanted to buy their stuff. And so they railed against low-carb diets. And has reduced by more than 20% in Australia. Remember the studies out of Australia during the past 2 decades. Furthermore, consumers' level of nutritional knowledge of the potato is poor. Oh, it's all your fault. You, the consumer, simply don't know enough about all the good that comes from potatoes. I actually interviewed a guy one time on the Living La Vida Low Carb show who was in favor of a potato-only diet. I forget his name, but I had him on the Living La Vida Low Carb show, and he sat there and ate potatoes, what was it, like 8 to 10 of them a day. He had no butter, no nothing on them, just plain friggin' boiled, roasted. He did everything to them that he could just to prove you could survive on potatoes. And I'm thinking, okay, there's more to life then. And at some point, where are you going to get amino acids, protein, and fat? It was scary, this guy. I need to find that podcast and post it again sometime. But that was a scary one, the potato diet guy. But we don't have enough knowledge of potatoes, they say. And people in Europe and Australia perceive potatoes negatively because of their high carbohydrate content. Not just Europe and Australia. America, Canada, all around the world, we routinely recognize that potatoes are a problem. Now, maybe the only place that it's not deemed a problem is Ireland, because that's the home of potatoes, but yeah. And as Joshua says, a potato diet is a crash diet. Yeah, you will crash, that's for sure. Despite a relatively low energy density, potatoes are classified as a high glycemic index food. Well, it's not their energy density, it's their carbohydrate content. That's what makes it a high glycemic index food. While dietary management of type 2 diabetes is complex, the use of glycemic index of carbohydrate foods is of interest to those with type 2 diabetes. Evidence-based guidelines recommend consuming low GI foods, things like whole grain bread, legumes, and basmati rice. I don't think anybody that I know is a medical professional treating type 2 diabetics is putting any of their patients on whole grain bread, legumes, or basmati rice. Basmati rice. I'll get it right in a minute. They're not. You think Dr. Berry is putting any of his patients on that? You think Dr. Westman is putting any of his patients on whole grain bread? No, he's taking them off of those things because those are the things they thought were healthy and they're anything but. And they use these foods to replace high GI foods such as potatoes as a means for controlling their glycemic response in their body. While the GI of potatoes has been well documented, there is wide variability depending on potato variety and cooking method. Let's stop there. Yes, there are different ways to prepare the food. Yes, there are different ways the body will respond with mixing in other foods, with the way you prepare it. Yes, but the problem is you make this blanket statement that potatoes are perfectly fine for a type 2 diabetic to eat, and people aren't getting the context of what you mean. Because people are going to prepare the potato like they want to prepare it because they've been given the green light by a study that tells them potatoes are just fine. They're not digging deep into the details like I am here. They're just hearing about this study. Oh, okay, well, why potatoes? Like literally the headline of this other one. Type 2 diabetes patients can eat potatoes without blood sugar control issues, study finds. What are you going to do if you're a patient and you read that headline? Oh, wow, I've been avoiding potatoes for no good reason. A study found it. It must be okay. And they're going to go eat potatoes the way they want to eat them. And they're going to load it up with everything. That's the danger of this kind of thing. It's why on these Jimmy Rants, I spend so much time going over studies in detail. Because if you don't get the details, you're missing the point of what they're trying to communicate in the studies. The protocol for glycemic index testing requires foods to be consumed in isolation, typically following an overnight fast in healthy individuals who have normal glycemic control. There are major limitations using glycemic index of singular foods and their acute effect on glucose levels when trying to determine the influence on long-term health indices, and especially in those people with type 2 diabetes. Indeed, individual foods are rarely consumed in isolation, but are more likely to be eaten with foods as part of mixed meals. They can assume that all they want. Yes, most of the time, these high glycemic foods are consumed with other foods, which would make it a mixed meal. But I know people, you know them too, who would eat a potato all by itself. You would. I know people that do that. They'll go to a restaurant. Oh, okay, I'll have a baked potato with margarine, please. That's it, and that's all they'll eat. Everything they would eat would just be that in one meal. In this regard, the GI and the glycemic response to potatoes is influenced by not only the co-ingestion of other foods and their physical properties, such as the macronutrient composition. Yes, it is impacted and influenced by that. Eating fat and protein with a high glycemic carbohydrate does somewhat blunt the blood sugar effect, but when your diet is consisting of 50% carbohydrate, ain't no way the rest of the macronutrients are going to blunt that much carbohydrate. But also the method of preparation and cooking, which can substantially alter the content of resistant starch. So I was first introduced to resistant starch when I was in the paleo community. This is right in 10 years ago. So basically the concept of resistant starch is we all have a gut microbiome. we need to feed the gut microbiome with something. And so you don't want it to impact your blood sugar, and so therefore have a resistant starch. Now, in this study, they cooked a potato, cooled the potato for 24 hours, and then reheated the potato before they ate it. That supposedly makes it resistant starch. Back in the paleo day, they got potato starch. Remember the big cans of like potato starch? And they were sitting there, and it's like dry, flaky little things. They would take a tablespoon, and they would sit there and eat it straight up like that. I am not kidding you. Go look it up online. You can see these idiots. People doing that, thinking they were consuming resistant starch to feed the microbiome. What they didn't realize, and I talked to Dr. Terry Walls about this, you don't need resistant starch to feed the microbiome. You can feed the microbiome just fine with just a little bit of like green leafy vegetables. Doesn't take much to feed the microbiome. And yet they were all in on that. And apparently these researchers think resistant starch is the bee's knees. With repeated cooling and heating, the resistant starch content of potatoes is known to increase, slowing digestion and absorption, and then consequently reducing the glycemic response. So the theory is you cook it, you cool it, you cook it, you cool it. It actually makes the starch in there less resistant, or more resistant, excuse me, to spiking your blood sugar. Anecdotally, I've heard people say it absolutely does not, and I've had other people that say it absolutely does. So I think it's highly individualized, and again, to make this across the board blanket statement, and especially for people with type 2 diabetes who we know have insulin resistance, this is a slippery slope. I would say if you're a type 2 diabetic and you're reading this study or hearing me talk about it, and you're like, oh, let me see how that does in me, test it, but be vigorous in your testing and repeat the testing just to make sure that it is going to be on the up and up for you. But this is not going to make them, not absolve you of having that results from the starch. Finally, there is a large individual variability in the glycemic response to the same foods regardless of the GI. That's literally what I was just saying. Which makes me wonder, why are they being so sure of themselves about potatoes if there's such a wide variability in the glycemic response to the same foods? You can't tell a type 2 diabetic to go eat potatoes, it's just fine, it's not going to mess with your blood sugar, when there is such a wide variability in the blood glucose response. A type 2 diabetic eating a potato is insane. And yet here we have a study out of Australia trying to promote the idea that eating white potatoes is going to have no consequences on your blood sugar. And I call crap on that. This current study determined the impact of different methods of potato preparation when consumed as part of a mixed evening meal on postprandial glycemic response. Additionally, the study determined the nocturnal glycemic response. Remember, that's the response in the blood sugar at night. That's what nocturnal is. And the postprandial insulin response, that's after eating, in individuals with type 2 diabetes. We compared several potato-based meals to a low GI, the basmati rice, isoenergetic, meaning it's the same calories, macronutrient match. Remember, they all had 50% carbohydrate, 30% fat, and 20% protein in their meals. And they hypothesized that co-ingestion of potato as part of a mixed meal would not result in a worse after eating and at night glycemic response or insulin response. A secondary hypothesis was that pre-cooking, then cooling the potato before consumption would lower the postprandial glycemic response of potato as part of a mixed evening meal due to the change and due to it becoming resistant starch, which we were just talking about. So let's look at the study design. Participants completed 4 different experimental conditions in a randomized crossover design. So basically there's 4 different groups. They were randomized to one of the 4. They did their wing of the study, and then they waited 9 days for a washout period, and then they switched them to another wing until they got through all 4 categories, that every single person went through all 4 categories. The study was conducted at St. Patrick's campus of Australian Catholic University from July 2018 through April 2019. It was approved by the ACU Human Research Ethics Committee, and it was registered with the Australian New Zealand Clinical Trials Registry, carried out according to the Declaration of Helsinki. That's pretty standard. Eligible participants provided written consent forms. So the participants were adults with obesity, BMI between 25 and 45. They were between the ages of 35 and 75, all of them diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, and they either control it with diet or metformin. They have to have at least 3 months have had type 2 diabetes, and they have to meet all the criteria of having type 2 diabetes according to the American Diabetes Association. They also have to have a sedentary lifestyle. This was interesting in terms of both their activity and their job. They could not have more than 150 minutes a week of moderate intensive exercise for the last 3 months. They also have to have more than 3 hours a day where they sit down. They were recruited through social media. Potential participants were excluded if they met the following exclusion criteria. If their A1C was less than 6.5, so in other words, they didn't want you to be a healthy diabetic, so you couldn't have it less than 6.5, or greater than 9, so they didn't want really bad type 2 diabetics, but 9 is still a high A1C. They can't be taking insulin or any other hypoglycemic agents except metformin. They did allow people in with metformin, and it's pretty standard practice that most type 2 diabetes patients are on metformin. They can't be pregnant, they can't be pre or perimenopausal, can't smoke, can't have any other systemic illnesses, can't have bariatric surgery in their past, gastrointestinal disorders, nor can they have intolerance to the principal study foods. So in other words, if they can't tolerate the potatoes or the rice, then they weren't allowed in the study. Telephone pre-screening, including a medical history, age, self-reported height and body mass index, and detailed explanation of the study. So they went through all that to find the participants. So once they got their participants, they had baseline testing. After the pre-screening, eligible participants attended the lab for a morning fasted baseline testing visit a minimum of 1 week prior to the first wing of the study, where height and body mass were measured using a stadiometer and digital scale. Resting blood pressure was also measured in duplicate using an automated blood pressure monitor. In duplicate means they did 2 readings and then they averaged them. Waist and hip circumference were measured using a metal tape measure. Participants also underwent a Dexa scan. So they did take a look at body fat and lean mass and bone density on the Dexa scan. Those are pretty cool, by the way, if you've never had one. So what they were looking for on the Dexa was total mass, fat-free mass, which is the lean mass, and then a coefficient of variation for all the measures. Finally, the participants underwent a test to determine their resting metabolic rate, to determine resting energy expenditure as previously described. So that's interesting. They kind of wanted to see if they truly are sedentary, I suppose, and it would show up in that resting metabolic rate. All right, so let's look at the study protocol itself. And if you joined us late, we are going over a study that literally is claiming potatoes are okay for type 2 diabetes patients. And they say it's no blood sugar impact whatsoever. So we're going over this study in detail. I've got the full study right in front of me, and it was published in the journal, Clinical Nutrition, a couple days ago. So block randomization by cohort was determined using computer-generated random numbers and sealed opaque envelopes. In other words, they truly did it blinded. Participants were assigned to cohorts of 2 to 5 per experimental trial. 3 days of habitual monitoring of each participant took place prior to each of the experimental conditions. During this time, their dietary intake was recorded via a 3-day food record, which participants were asked to replicate and record prior to the trial. They put activity monitors on them. Additionally, a continuous glucose monitor, which I haven't heard of this one before. iPro 2 CGM with in-light sensor. Apparently it's out of Northridge, California. Most of them use the standard one from Abbott. So I'm surprised they did this iPro 2. Maybe that's all they could get in Australia. It was inserted into the subcutaneous fat tissue on the lower back and secured with waterproof dressing. So they did it on the back. That's weird. Most of the time you put the CGM in the arm. I've seen it put on the belly. I've seen it on the leg. I've literally never seen a CGM put on someone's like fat back there on the backside of their body. That's interesting. Following the insertion, a 1 hour period was used to allow it to adjust. So that's typical. A handheld commercial time stamper glucometer called AccuCheck Performa 2 was used for CGMS calibration from a finger stick. So they would also test their blood sugar, not just with the CGM, but also do a finger prick just to confirm the accuracy. So that's good. They would do that 4 times a day. All participants were provided with standard meals, including breakfast, lunch, and dinner. They had to consume them at very specific times, 8:30, 1 o'clock, and 6 o'clock. On day 1, the trial day, participants arrived at the lab at 7:45 for a fasted blood sample. Participants were then provided with a standard breakfast to be consumed in the lab at around 8:30 a.m. Before leaving the lab, they were provided the same lunch as day 0 to be consumed in a free-living environment. They consumed that one at 1 o'clock. Participants then returned to the lab at 5:30, and before consuming an evening meal, they hung around. Depending on the condition being tested, they had some more blood work done. The 4 conditions tested, we talked about already: boiled, roasted, boiled, then cooled, and then the control, the basmati rice. The basmati rice control meal was identical to the dinner meal, except for it was rice instead of the potatoes. Blood samples were collected prior to the evening meal consumption, immediately post-meal, and at 30-minute intervals following that post-meal, up to 120 minutes. So 30, 60, 90, and 120. So they ate at, what time did they eat that meal? So that last meal, they ate at 6 o'clock. So they had to stick around till 8 o'clock. No, wait, they had to eat the meal at 6 o'clock, but then they'd be done with the meal. Let's just give them 20 minutes to eat by 6:20. So then they had to stay till 8:20 to get all those readings. So then they also did visual analogs that looked at hunger, satiety, fullness, and appetite, completed using a computer-based program on 4 occasions: day 1 before breakfast, before evening meal on day 1, 120 minutes following the evening meal after day 1, and the day 2 fasted. So they had these monitors on them that could detect all these things. Okay. So they came back the next day at 8 a.m. and did it all over again. The nutrient composition of all foods in the experimental condition was obtained from FoodWorks. Total daily estimated energy intake was calculated at baseline. Energy distribution of standard meals was spread as 25% at breakfast, 35% at lunch, 40% at dinner. No snacks were provided or consumed on day 0 or 1. Diet composition was 50, 30, 20, like we mentioned earlier. Carb, fat, protein. Participants were instructed to consume the meals at standardized times. During each experimental period, participants abstained from having alcohol. So they're doing this study, but they weren't allowed to have any alcohol. That's interesting. But habitual caffeine consumers were instructed to consume and record all caffeine intake with no added milk or sugar sweetener. So if they wanted their coffee and they normally drank coffee, they let them have it, but you couldn't add milk or sugar or sweeteners. Participants were able to consume water as much as they wanted, and they were instructed to record their daily water intake volume. Speaking of water, dilly. And so they went and looked at how they prepared the potatoes. All of them were provided within the study were russet Burbank variety. Potato preparation was consistent prior to all trials and conditions. They peeled the potatoes, washed them, cut them into 30-gram cubes for all cooking methods. Boiled potatoes, roasted potatoes were cooked immediately prior to consumption. The roasted potatoes were prepared in a convection oven with no fat or oil. Ugh. Have you ever had like potatoes that didn't have fat in them? They're gross. The cooled potato condition involved boiling the potatoes 28 hours prior to consuming them, allowing potatoes to cool for a full 24 hours, and then they reheat them immediately prior to consumption. I thought the point of resistant starch was to make sure it's as resistant as possible. Why did they reheat them? So if they cook them and then they cool them for 24 hours, those participants should have eaten that cold. Why didn't they do that? Because as soon as you heat them back up again, that resistant starch ain't so resistant anymore. Basmati rice was purchased in microwave packs and prepared in the microwave according to the packet instructions. Why? Like, microwave kills off a lot of nutrients? Like, they could have easily just cooked that in stovetop. The remainder of the mixed evening meals consisted of, all right, so here's what else was in the meal besides the potatoes and the rice. Crumbed chicken breast, very lean meat, prepared in a convection oven, and frozen mixed vegetables of carrots, cauliflower, and broccoli. So that's the whole Normandy mix, prepared in the microwave. What is with cooking in the microwave? Are these researchers that lazy they can't get a stovetop and put this food on a stovetop? Activity monitoring. Participants were asked to continue to monitor their regular daily activities, both at work and at home life throughout the study. Each trial period, participants wore this thing called an active pal inclinometer on the thigh. So they have the blood glucose monitor on the back, and they got this inclinometer on their thigh. It looked like the $6 Million Man having all these little gizmos all over their body. They also had to have this thing called an actigraph accelerometer around their waist over the right hip in order to assess and monitor physical activity and movement patterns. Participants were asked to maintain their same sleep routine and patterns throughout the study. So let's look at the biochemical analysis. What did they take a look at? Upon collection, blood samples were inverted and triglycerides were measured from the whole blood. The remaining blood was centrifuged and kept stored. From thawed samples, plasma glucose was measured in duplicate. So they took 2 readings. Plasma insulin was also measured using an assay called enzyme-linked immunosorbent. Those are all standardized tests. All right, so the data analysis in this study: habitual dietary intake of all foods and beverages reported through the baseline were analyzed using that FoodWorks software. Vitamin and mineral supplements were excluded. Average energy, macronutrients, sugar, alcohol, and fiber were obtained and reported. The glycemic index and subsequent glycemic load, so there they are acknowledging glycemic load, of each meal provided in the experimental period was estimated using data from the International GI Database. As most of the foods had multiple GI values, the selection of the GI was made hierarchically in order of preference. From number 1, the same brand and variety, as well as the method of preparation. Number 2, it has to be a food that they eat and test in Australia. Remember, the study's in Australia. Number 3, an average value. And number 4, the closest match. In other words, matched with a similar amount of carbohydrate. The percentage of available carbohydrate, which excludes the fiber, that each food item contributed to the total meal was multiplied by the GI value. Values were then summed to estimate the GI of the total meal, and the formula used for calculating the GI of a meal used the GI values of the individual food items. So all of that to say, they were coming up with a formulaic way of determining glycemic impact so that they could conduct this study and say, okay, here's a high glycemic impact food, and how did it do as compared to ones that are lower? All right, let's skip ahead just a little bit. Let's get to the resistant starch. Resistant starch content of the potatoes and rice was determined following the commercially available Megazyme resistant starch assay. Potatoes and rice samples were prepared at the Australian Export Grain Innovation Center lab, with the cooking methods replicated and a homogeneous ground 100-gram sample obtained and measured in duplicates. So they actually tested it for its level of resistant starch. And again, if that's a new term to you, go look it up. It was very popular when I was in the paleo world about a decade ago. And the idea is you eat this in order to feed the gut microbiome. But we have since learned you don't need resistant starch in order to feed your gut microbiome. You can get all of that from green leafy vegetables and other non-starchy forms of vegetables. You don't need to eat potato starch, which is what all the paleo people were doing 8 to 10 years ago. All right, let's skip ahead to the results. Okay. So the participants, let's take a look at who was in the study. Of the 92 participants who were screened over the phone, 27 of them were eligible and they consented. 24 participants, 18 of them were male, 6 of them female, and they were randomized, as we have been talking about the whole study. Participants complied with recording 3-day dietary intake prior to their experimental condition. No difference between the conditions. All participants reported, blah, 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 blah. All right, so let's keep going down. So the venous glucose, insulin, and triglycerides, a main effective time was detected for venous glucose concentrations with no differences between meals, no differences in postprandial peak glucose concentrations. So these are all in the test meals leading up to the experiment. They found no differences in their peak glucose, no differences in their all the other parameters they were trying to take a look at. A main effect of condition as well as time and interaction were observed. Looking at insulin as well, insulin concentrations following the control meal were lower at 30 and 60 compared to the cooled potato. Insulin concentrations following the control evening meal were lower at 90 minutes following the consumption as compared to boiled potato. A main effect of condition for peak postprandial insulin concentration was observed. Blah, 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 blah. They're just basically saying they wanted to see what normal was for the study participants so that when they got into the actual study and did it, they know what is normal for these people. So if there's any abnormality from that normal, they can then kind of compare and contrast. So the interstitial glucose, remember that's the CGM. It's not measuring blood, it's measuring interstitial fluid, looking for glucose concentration. So due to the multiple measurement points, which was 288 of them, the interstitial glucose by time, 24 hours, was not subjected to statistical analysis. All right, so let's see. Subjective measures of appetite. A main effective time was detected for ratings of hunger, satiety, fullness, and prospective food consumption. No difference between the conditions for all subjective measures of appetite were detected. No differences were detected in ratings of hunger, satisfaction, fullness, appetite at the fasted times of either day 1 or day 2. Can I say something about that? They're type 2 diabetics, they're older, they have a higher BMI, and they're eating half of their calories as carbohydrate. Now, I don't care what carbohydrate it is. If half of your calories are coming from carbohydrate and you are the worst of insulin resistant, which is what a type 2 diabetic is, how are you not hungry? So while there may not have been detectable differences in the ratings of hunger, satisfaction, fullness, and appetite, they could be hungry beforehand and they're hungry afterhand. How could they not report that? And we know, even from our own experiences, and I see various people that see clients all the time, teaching your clients that when you eat a low carbohydrate diet, ketogenic diet, one of the hallmarks is the hunger goes away and the cravings go away and the feelings of fullness go away and your feeling of satisfaction and feeling good is there. But they didn't mention anything about that here. All right, let's look at the discussion portion of this, and then I'm definitely wanting to see what you have to say. So we investigated the impact of the method of potato preparation on postprandial glucose and insulin response in people with type 2 diabetes when potato was consumed as part of a mixed evening meal. Ingestion of a potato-based evening meal did not result in a greater postprandial glucose concentration compared to an isoenergetic, same calories, control meal. Additionally, the cooking method did not influence that postprandial glucose response. However, when potato was pre-cooked and then cooled before consumption, there was higher insulin as compared to the rice. So the point of that story is maybe resistant starch isn't so resistant after all. Yes, it keeps your blood sugar controlled, but your insulin is what matters. What's really fascinating is I don't remember seeing any of the actual insulin readings on in this study, because you can talk about blood sugar and insulin. Let me see if I can find it, but I didn't see anything, and I'm looking close. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to really determine their glucose levels. Remember, their glucose is going to be in millimole per liter, not in milligrams per deciliter like we do. So looks like in the, yeah, I'm looking at it. I'm trying to do the translation in my head too. They had very high glucose levels as by the standards of what we would consider healthy. We would consider under 100 healthy, definitely in the 70s and 80s healthy. There's no way they're going to get those numbers eating a 50% carbohydrate diet. So they were doomed from the start. The majority of the work that has determined the GI and glycemic response to meals and foods has been undertaken in the morning. They already talked about that. Let's get to the end. So they claimed that they gave a standard portion of carbohydrate, which was 50 grams, regardless of the individual daily energy requirements and difference in body mass. Standard portion of carbohydrate. Who says it's standard? Can you just take it out? You could. They didn't. Trying to see if they show any like weaknesses in the study and strengths like they normally do. Okay. All right. The superior satiating effects of the potato. Are they serious? The satiating effects of a potato. I'm going to take a poll. How many of you guys have consumed a potato and you felt incredibly satiated for hours upon hours upon hours as compared to eating a ribeye steak? Anyone? Anyone? Bueller? No. Satiating, superior satiating effects of the potato? I think the most satiating thing is a slab of meat. But the superior satiating effects, it's almost like they're sucking up to the person and the group that was funding this. Remember, it was funded by the Alliance for Potato Research and Education. There's a reason they're getting, oh, rah, gaga, goo goo about potatoes. That line got me. The superior satiating effects of the potato were attributed to their lower energy density, as large volume of potatoes are required to obtain that 45 grams of carbohydrate. The size of the meal in the current study, similar for all conditions, likely to have overridden any differences in satiety. We acknowledge that despite a standardized lead-in period prior to each trial, only one evening meal of each condition was assessed, and there is known individual and day-to-day variability in glycemic response. That's true. They only tested one singular meal for each of these cohorts in the study. Is one meal enough? Should they have done maybe that same meal replicated 7 days in a row to see if over the course of that 7 days they had any variation, and or to average it out over the 7 days and then have the 9-day washout period and then have them do the next? I don't know. Future advances in glycemic management are likely to be based around personalized nutrition. Well, hallelujah. I think it always should be that way. where predictors of blood glucose response will include individual dietary and physical activity patterns to assist in managing blood glucose and metabolic health. Studies investigating glycemic control over longer periods of time in response to different meals and foods will accelerate the field of personalized nutrition. They got that right. I think personalized nutrition is the wave of the future, that we're going to get away from these blanket, everybody should do X diet. And it's more going to be practitioners going to someone, running various markers, testing various things, seeing personal preferences for foods by the individuals, and then customizing something for them. That's the wave of the future. So in conclusion, we provide evidence that compared to an isoenergetic mixed meal of low GI basmati rice, boiled or roast potatoes classified as high GI, consumed as a mixed evening meal, are not associated with an unfavorable postprandial glucose and insulin response or nocturnal glycemic control. Ugh. Guys, I still think this is irresponsible research, because you simply cannot tell a type 2 diabetic without having any context whatsoever. You can't tell them to eat potatoes to control your blood sugar and say that it has no impact. I contend that most of these people in this study had very high glucose throughout. And so you can't put someone eating a low-carb ketogenic diet, have them start eating potatoes and not think it's going to impact their blood sugar levels. It absolutely is going to impact their blood sugar levels. And if you're type 2 diabetic and you read this kind of thing, can I just implore you, test, and test some more? Because no study is going to supersede what you yourself testing at home will show. And so if you think you can eat potatoes in your evening meal and that your blood glucose level won't go all wackadoodle on you, test it. Test and see how you do. And if you want to see your blood sugar readings at night, stick on a CGM and test it. That's going to confirm whether this Australian study, paid for a potato company, is valid or not. All right, I'm dying to see what you guys have to say. We're going to come here first to Instagram, then over to Facebook, finally over to YouTube. Thank you all for being here today on Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is a website. You can see all the past episodes there. Kat says, I heard that cold pasta, rice, potatoes have a low glycemic index, partially not digestible, but why even bother checking? Zero nutrition. Exactly. It's so funny in this study, Kat, where they were trying to claim, oh my gosh, we have far superior nutrition in potatoes. And I'm thinking, okay, there's potassium in there. There's a few little minerals and things, but there's no protein. It's basically all carbohydrate. What exactly is the far superior nutrient density in a potato? And then remember, they skinned them. So they took the skin off, which is where a lot of nutrients could be, fiber and things like that. They just left the middle part, put them in little cubes, and then prepared them in the various ways. But I agree with you. None of that adds any value to your diet. Joshua says, fat-free sour cream, what is that? Yeah, exactly. Stay away from it. It's disgusting. Back in my low-fat days, I had a lot of it. Keto Blazer, I think that this study is really dangerous. It is. It is, because it's leading people down a very dangerous path if they're not aware of all the details that I went over here today. Once you get into the dirty details, you realize there's more to the story than what they shared in the headline. Because the headline very clearly states, type 2 diabetes patients can eat potatoes without blood sugar control issues, study shows. Which is not what the study showed. But that's what's out there, and that's what people are going to see as a headline. It'll probably run on your news, and they'll go, oh my gosh, I could have been having potatoes all this time. And then a type 2 diabetic starts eating lots of potatoes again, not cooked in any particular way. And then their blood sugar goes out of control, their A1C goes up, their insulin goes up, and they go to the doctor, and they're like, what in the world are you doing? Well, I heard I could have all the potatoes in the world. It's just not going to help people. Kat says, I guess the potato industry is desperate to push its product. They are. They really are. They've lost a lot of market share. 20% down in sales. That's a hit. That's a big hit. They should have monitored not only blood sugar, but the insulin as well. I'm sure there would have been a totally different picture. Well, they did measure insulin, and the resistant starch one actually had the worst insulin response of all of them. But you're right. They needed to do both. Joshua says, looks like science is for sale. Well, in this case, it does look like it. T1 Flyer says, I'm a type 1 diabetic. I wear a CGM. This article is total BS. Yeah, it's actually a study that got published of all things. Like, it's irresponsible because as a type 1, that blood sugar monitor, don't lie. You don't make insulin. So when you don't make insulin, whatever food you eat, that's the impact on your blood sugar. You have to inject yourself with insulin to deal with the appropriate amount of carbohydrate. And I guarantee you, as a type 1 diabetic, wearing a CGM, if you ate a potato, you would see a skyrocketing blood sugar, and you'd have to take some fast-acting insulin to get that down so you wouldn't go into a hyperglycemic situation. Starch feeds the microbiome indiscriminately, the good guys and the bad guys. That's a good point, Joshua. Yes, you can feed the gut microbiome, but you're feeding everybody. And I want to feed just the good boys. Kat says, two things I clearly see. One wants to boost sales. Another wants to justify their carb addiction. Oh, that's true. That's true. A lot of people say, well, if I can have potatoes again, okay. And then they're just addicted to the carbohydrate. That's true. Absolutely. Shifting into success says, I get more hungry. Yeah, I think most of us do. Most of us do. Beth says, I've thought I was full while bloated until I actually got hungry while still bloated and no room. Yeah. Yep. Joshua says, I found potatoes filling, but I had to have a full plate of them. Well, yeah. I mean, if you stuff your stomach full of starch, you will get full because your belly is full of food. But at some point, that food's going to get digested and get out of the system, and it's going to spike insulin, and then you're going to get hungry again. So I guess it's how quickly that happens. Conway Cindy says, as people start eating a big bag of chips after reading this. Yeah. That's the other thing. Oh, potatoes are fine. And so what's their thought of potatoes? Potato chips. Never mind, they're soaked in vegetable oils, which I'm not getting started on vegetable oils today. I'm still shocked that people do not understand that carbs are sugar. Yeah. They turn to sugar in the body, don't they, Kim? And don't come without consequences, especially for those with type 2 diabetes. All right, thank you, Instagram. Let me pop over here now to my Facebook channel. What's up, Facebook? See what you have to say about this crazy study. Finally made it for a live. Well, welcome, Jenny. I'm glad you're here today. Norma says, I read the book by Rob Wolf, Eat to Live. I did a lot of testing with different foods to see the blood sugar response. Tubers and breads were my worst. Took forever to return my blood sugar back to normal, so bread and tubers are off the menu for me. I know people that'll have pasta or bread or tubers, and they'll do a test over like many hours until it comes back to baseline. And some of them, it's a long lagging response. Like it'll have the spike, and it'll be this trickle for 6 to 8 hours. I remember one of the conferences I went to, Dr. Andreas Ienfeld from dietdoctor.com. He was doing some testing of blood sugar, and I'm trying to remember what he had. He had some carby something, bread, pastas. I think it was pasta, a big plate of pasta with sauce and bread, and he just wanted to see what would happen. And it went way up, like 180s, and it just trickled, and it literally kept stretching out. He said he went 6 hours, and it was still elevated, and he kept going into 7 hours. It still didn't come back to baseline again. 7 hours. And of course, in the meantime, he's starving. Because when your blood sugar is doing that, your insulin's real high, and insulin goes high, you turn on all those hunger hormones, and it's no bueno. Emily says there's a program called the G Plan. They promote high-carb sweet potatoes and other carbs for weight loss and for type 2 diabetics. They say keto is bad for hormone health for people over 40. Crazy. Well, it sounds like they're just trying to come up with a program that they can make money off of, because it is totally crazy. Lynn says, through my keto way of eating lifestyle, I came to realize I do not actually like to eat potatoes. It was just a carrier for all the good stuff, the toppings, the keto stuff. I put the toppings on my protein now, win-win. That's true. Back when I ate potatoes and I wasn't dieting, because when you diet and you eat potatoes, you either eat it plain with salt and pepper, or new salt, the salt alternative, or you put a little margarine on there, but it really wasn't a fat-free sour cream and cheese. Yeah, horrible. But yeah, when you weren't dieting, you'd put full-fat sour cream, cheddar cheese, butter. I mean, you just load that bad boy up. Chili. Anybody put chili on their potato back in the day? Yeah. Nacho cheese sauce, like all kind of stuff we put on that potato. Marcy says, love your books. Thank you. I'm giving all of them away this week, so stick around. Christine says, I do miss my potatoes and rice. I can't lie, but I haven't eaten them in almost 2 years. If I eat them, I will go on a binge, all or nothing. I can't dabble. And that's good you know that about yourself. And it's good you have that control now. All right. Well, thank you guys here on Facebook. I'm going to move you guys to the side over here, Instagram, so I can get to my YouTubers. What's up, YouTube? See what you have to say about this one. All right. Courtney says, this headline definitely grabbed my attention. I've got my type 2 controlled now, but the potatoes are kryptonite for me. Well, hopefully I gave you a little food for thought today. Yeah, potato is a vegetable. That's what they teach us in school, says Johanna. Because we know they don't lie to us in school. Shirley says, this study looks like it was a big waste of time and money. Oh, no. They got their money. The researchers, they got their money. They took the potato people's money in a lickety-split moment. Look at those macros. Why would they make the protein that low? You'd think they'd throttle the fat. Well, they did make it 30%. That was the only reasonable one. 50% of it was carbohydrate, 20% protein, 30% fat. Of the three, the fat was the most reasonable. Still could have been a little bit higher. Courtney says, my doctor gets frustrated because I keep talking about lowering my insulin in spite of regular blood glucose. Finally, both normal and blood pressure are finally normalized. No coincidence, as we know. Good job. Potato-only diet is still a thing. Oh, I'm sure it is. I have people telling me keto is a joke because they've lost weight doing it. It's not all about weight loss. Or they didn't lose weight doing it. Yeah, I remember I had Dr. John McDougall on the Living La Vida Low Carb show. If you ever want to go look it up, it's episode 686. I'll never forget episode 686 of the Living La Vida Low Carb show. I'm surprised it wasn't episode 666 because Dr. John McDougall is a very famous vegan, starch-based diet advocate. And he was pushing the potatoes. And he was anti-Atkins, anti-low carb, anti-meat, blah, 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 blah. And he was all about, the nutrient density of potatoes and legumes and starches. Starch is the way to go. In fact, he has a book, go look it up, called The Starch Solution. And he promotes it for type 2 diabetics and insulin resistance and all the everything. And now he looks like Skeletor in his 70s. He looks about 90-something, but he's 70 now. All right, let's come back over here to YouTube. Why would you ever just eat a potato as is? I would have to be desperate to eat. It's just so bland, yeah. Courtney says, fat might blunt the effect, but butter on potatoes are also going to increase consumption. That's true. Palatability becomes a thing at that point. Johanna says, does it really matter how the potatoes were cooked? Can't understand. Well, according to this, no. Other than the resistant starch, all of them had the same impact on glucose, which they didn't tell us was good or bad. They just said same impact. Well, same impact. If they all spiked it, that ain't good. The only one that was off course was the resistant starch made their insulin go higher statistically than the rest. Starch is starch, carbohydrate is carbohydrate, or am I just stupid? No, you're not stupid, Johanna. That is true. September says, I used to eat potatoes, bread, and pasta all at the same time. I hate to see what my glucose did. Yeah, don't want to see, right? Lauren says, my husband reminded me of how addicted to potatoes I used to be. I also can't have just a couple bites because I will gorge. You're not alone. Lauren, you're not alone. There are a lot of people, they love their potatoes. Is a potato better than a cupcake? I suppose. But glycemically, it's going to hit your body in the same way. Holly says, my husband is having turnips with our roast. That's good. That's real good. So guys, brand new study. And you're probably going to hear some people talking about this. Type 2 diabetics, you can have all the potatoes you want. I don't know why you've been avoiding them all these years. So good for you. Are they? Are they? At the end of the day, you need to be the one testing that to confirm or deny if they're good for you or not. That's it for this episode of Jimmy Rants. JimmyRants.com is the website. And as always, you can engage live in the content. You got to go follow me right here. I'm on Instagram. I'm at Living Low Carb Man, LIVINLOWCARBMAN. Once you're there, engage live and enjoy the content here at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, Monday through Friday. Thank you so much for being here today. We also simulcast live over here on my Facebook channel as well as over on my YouTube channel. And guess what, YouTube? It's your day. Somebody on YouTube right now, I'm about to choose to win one of my 7 major publisher books. This is my contest that I'm doing this week called the Farewell Freebies Giveaway. And so these are my 7 books. And one of you randomly, here, let me move you out of the way again, Instagram. Sorry about that. One of you randomly is about to win. So you're going to have to contact me through Instagram Messenger or Facebook Messenger, something. But the winner of today's random book is Shirley. So Shirley, you need to reach out to me either through Facebook or Instagram DM, and you get to choose your choice. So I need from you your full name, your mailing address, and what book you want. So congratulations, Shirley, over on YouTube. Appreciate you being here today on Jimmy Rants. That's not all the giveaways I have. I got plenty more, you guys. Go engage in my work. I'm still giving lots and lots of them away. So go and check it out, you guys, and you will get a chance to win. And remember, come back Friday, ask me anything. I'm going to be going crazy giving away books on Friday live here on the air on Jimmy Rants. If you miss a live, you can watch it on replay right here on Instagram. It goes up on IGTV just as soon as this is over. Hello to all the people watching it on IGTV. We also put the past episodes up over on YouTube. Just type in a keyword, Jimmy Rants. You will find the show. Today is Living La Vida Low Carb show. We have a Jimmy Rants bonus episode. Tara Garrison is a mindset coach, really good friend of mine as well. And we went in all kinds of directions about trauma, about exercise, about mindset, you name it, we talked about it. So go and check that out over on YouTube today. It's also airing on the Living La Vida Low Carb show. LLVLC.com is how you can access the podcast or wherever you listen to podcasts. And then finally, pop on over to the official website for this show. It is JimmyRants.com. While you're there, see all the past episodes, and you can also support my work either as a Patreon or through PayPal. And all of those links, you guys, are at JimmyRants.com. Okay, I have 2 more Jimmy Rants, and then I'm gone for 2020. So come back here tomorrow at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll see you then.